This is the new Sigma 24-70 f2.8 DG-DN Art Mark II, the successor to one of the budget favorites for Sony E and L mount of the last few years. Today we're going to review it and compare it to the original Sigma DG-DN and the Sony G Master Mark II. Let's get undone.
Gerald Undone. He's crazy.
What's happening, everybody? I'm Gerald Undone, and glass is glass, and glass breaks. For disclosure, you should be aware that Sigma did lend me this lens to make this review. I don't get to keep it, no money changed hands, and Sigma does not get any input on this video's production or get to preview it before it's posted. This video does have an actual sponsor though, and that's Storyblocks. All right, let's take a look at some of the new features and functions of this lens because they did add quite a few things over the original Sigma. Just like the Mark I, they still have the AF/MF switch and a function button and the zoom lock switch, which I really appreciated on the first version, but they've actually added a second function button on this one now. And then there's now the iris ring, which was absent on the first lens. And the iris ring comes with an iris lock, which I quite like. So that way, if you do set it to A, like I have here, because you want to adjust the iris in camera, it's not going to come off that A setting until you release this switch. And then they also have the ability to click or declick the iris ring here. Other than that, it's pretty similar, except for the zoom and focus ring are closer together and feel a little bit more cramped and a little bit smaller in order to accommodate all these extra functions when compared to the original, which has obviously beefier rings. And it's still an 82mm front filter thread, just like the original and just like the G Master 2. And if you were one of the users that had or heard about the original batch of the Mark I DGDNs that had this sort of issue where they were sucking dust in and they had to send them to Sigma, or, I think the later versions didn't have that issue. Anyway, Sigma told me that the new Mark II doesn't have any of those issues. So, I never had the issue in studio, obviously, but that's just something to be aware of. Now, it is significantly lighter than the Mark I. The Mark I comes in around 830 grams, and this one is now 735. So about 100 grams lighter. That puts it at about 1.6 pounds. It's much closer to the G Master 2 now, which it was a weight reduction over its original. The G Master 2 is still the lightest, though, at 695 grams, but only a 40 gram difference between these two versus the 140 between these two. Talking a little bit more about that zoom and focus ring, they're both extremely well dampened and have a really nice feel to them. Something that I always praised about the original Sigma, where sometimes the Sony lens can feel a little bit loosey-goosey. Now the manual focus ring also feels great, and it's very similar to the Mark I Sigma, where at first glance you might think that you can get solid repeatable focus from it, and you can, but it is non-linear. It feels almost linear, but if you actually do a test, you realize that it is acceleration-based. It has a very, very long throw, which is why when I reviewed the original Sigma, I thought, this manual focus isn't bad for a non-linear manual focus because you can get in there with small movements and they're somewhat repeatable. This new Sigma also has the closest minimum focus distance. It's now at 0.17 meters or 0.56 feet on the 24mm side, which is the closest reproduction. You get pretty close at 70mm as well, but if you want the most macro shot, it's going to be at 24mm. The biggest improvement, though, is going to be the autofocusing. This lens now features Sigma's new linear focusing motors for autofocus versus the older style ones that they were using on the Sigma Mark I. So this brings it more in line with something like a G Master for its focus, which is going to give you more precise autofocus, faster autofocus, it's smooth, and it's quiet. All right, let's get into Lightroom and look at those test images. But while I set that up, here's a quick message from the sponsor of today's video, Storyblocks. If you're not familiar, Storyblocks is a stock media platform that offers unlimited downloads of diverse and high-quality content for one predictable subscription cost. No more expensive pay-per-click pricing, just pick a plan, pay that fee, and that's it. You'll enjoy a library of over 1 million HD and 4K video files, images, and motion graphics templates. And speaking of those graphics, Storyblocks has expanded their library beyond just Premiere Pro and After Effects, and now includes customizable DaVinci Resolve templates for motion graphics and animated sequences, an essential tool for creating professional-looking videos at scale. And it's always easy to find what you're looking for in Storyblocks because the platform is very intuitive and new content is commissioned frequently to ensure you'll have fresh assets to satisfy your project. And on top of all that, Storyblocks has a special offer just for my audience. For a limited time, you'll get 3 additional months free if you sign up with an annual individual license plan. Just go to storyblocks.com/undone to take advantage of this exclusive offer, only available until the end of June 2024. The offer won't appear at checkout, but rest assured, it'll be automatically added to your account shortly after you sign up. Thanks for listening. Now let's get into Lightroom. Okay, for this first image here, we're talking about chromatic aberration, mostly longitudinal chromatic aberration, or Bokeh. There's also lateral fringing. That can be corrected in post. Bokeh can't be corrected too easily, and that's when you have color fringing on areas as they go out of focus to the foreground and the background. So let's zoom in here and we'll take a look. And you can see that there is some noticeable fringing. on the lines here, we get sort of an amber color. And then up here, we get a bit of a bluish cyan kind of hue. So you can see here, we got the new Sigma on the left. Look for the DGDN2. And then on the right, we have the original. And to me, they look about the same. Let's switch out the one on the right for the Sony. And I think that the Sony, the G Master Mark II, is a little bit better. I see a little bit less fringing than I do on the Sigma. This is the Sigma Mark II, and this is at 70mm, as close as I could focus. You can see we got pretty great sharpness in the center, all the little details here on the sticker on the Rubik's Cube. Now, if we jump to 24mm, as close as you can focus, you get this. You can see I still got the sharpness, so we're right at the minimum possible close focusing, and it's so distorted, and you can see there's a shadow on one side because the Rubik's Cube is basically almost inside the lens. It's pretty wild. But this is what a 24mm reproduction looks like. Now, I do want to talk quickly about the parfocal capabilities of this lens. So you see if we focus here and we get it reasonably sharp, and then we zoom out, we lose, there's quite a bit of softness going on here. And if we focus at 24mm and get that nice and sharp, and then zoom to 70mm, we completely lose focus. So I would not consider this lens parfocal at all. And here's a quick little comparison of the other reproduction ratios. On the right is the Mark I Sigma, and you can see they're actually pretty similar. But if we switch over to the Sony, you don't get quite as close. But the Sony also prevents distortion by not getting so close that it gets as distorted as the Sigma does. Now, while we're talking about that distortion, this is an uncorrected image for looking at both vignetting and distortion of a fence. Now, Sigma did send over the profiles for the new lens, and it obviously corrects them. It corrects them about as well as it did on the old Sigma. So there is definitely some barrel distortion going on. You can see it's not terrible. This was at the 24mm side because at 70, there wasn't any to worry about. If we compare this to the original Sigma, once again, you'll see that they're pretty similar. Maybe the new Sigma is slightly better, but it's very hard to tell a difference. And if we compare that to the Sony is, again, slightly better, but only a marginal difference here. And again, all three are easily corrected with their profiles. Now, flare was one where the new Sigma actually just won, hands down. So we're gonna do this in reverse order. This is the G Master, and you can see that we are losing some contrast and our blacks are being polluted down over here in the corner, and there is quite a few artifacts, a decent amount of ghosting going on in this extra little bit here. Sigma Mark I, a slight improvement. We're still polluted over here. We still have a decent amount of artifacts, but it's slightly better controlled. And if we jump to the Sigma Mark II, it's significantly better. Our blacks over here in the corner are black. Again, let's jump to the Sony. See how we can see that they're kind of gray. Here, they're kind of muddy brown, but here they're black. We keep them black, really excellent contrast, and the artifacts are significantly reduced. And then if you care about Sunstars, here's an F22 image. Look at them go. Look at all the little points. Let's do a quick little sharpness evaluation here. So it's punching in the center here. The one on the left is the Sigma Mark II. The one on the right is the Sigma Mark I. And honestly, like I've been saying all along, they're nearly identical. You can maybe argue that the new Sigma is slightly better, maybe a little bit better contrast, a little bit better detail, but they even lose their sharpness at around the same point as you move out to the side. So when we're all the way on the edges, they look about the same too. It's really hard to tell a difference between these two, in my opinion. Let's swap out the one on the right for the G Master. Here to me, it looks like the Sigma might actually be a little bit sharper in the center than the G Master is, to be honest. But I have a feeling that the G Master will perform better out toward the edge. And yes, I can see now already that it is. And yeah, this little critter here is definitely sharper on the Sony than it is on the Sigma. And again, better peripheral illumination. But this is still pretty marginal. I'm pixel peeping here, but if you just look at any random position like that, is the lens on the right worth 2x the lens on the left? Probably not. Now, one last note on the close focusing here. I did a couple shots where I minimum focused on an object with light glistening off it to see if there's any kind of weird aberrations going on when you're at the minimum focus. And so if we punch in super close here, we can see that no, we're actually doing a pretty good job of not having too much funny business going on, not too bad of a glistening aberration effect. I think it looks pretty good. And again, the sharpness is pretty fantastic. And also you can see a little bit of the transition out of focus here, but this one is a better example of that. We can see what the sort of bokeh looks like in a more naturalistic environment and the transitions out of focus, which I think are great. Really beautiful rendering here. Also really like these greens. And we still maintain really excellent sharpness in here with, again, not really any minimum focusing issues in terms of aberration. Now, continuing on with the bokeh observations, this is 24mm on the new Sigma wide open. We have an 11-bladed iris here, so we're getting really, really smooth orbs. We have a little bit of cutting in going on in the top corner here. And if we swap the one on the right out for the Sigma Mark I, once again, you can see they're very, very similar. Sony, again, very, very similar in terms of their inner quality and smoothness. I wouldn't say there's much of a bokeh advantage to any of these. Lastly, regarding that focus breathing, they all exhibit some and they're all pretty similar. If we start with the Sigma Mark II, you can see sort of how much it breathes. That's the frame looking like it zooms in a little bit on the side as we focus from minimum to infinity. Now you will notice that the Sigmas are slightly worse, and that's because, again, their minimum focusing distance is closer, so you're gonna see a little bit more breathing compensating for that fact that it can focus closer. But it's not that huge of a difference between them and the Sony. Keep in mind though that if you want to completely eliminate focus breathing, the Sony is going to have the ability, when paired with a body that supports it, to enable focus breathing compensation, where neither of the Sigma lenses will have that option. So out of the box, they're all the same, but with correction, the Sony will win ultimately. Okay, lastly, let's talk a little bit about value and about price. Now, I presume that the Sigma Mark II is going to replace the Sigma Mark I, but I'm told that the Sigma Mark II is going to be priced at around $11.99 US. And the Sony G Master Mark II is still going for $22.99 US. So almost double the price. And based on my testing, clearly not double the value in the image quality or even in the functions now, because that's what Sigma has mostly done to the new lens, is equalize the different functions like the aperture ring and that kind of thing. So now that is more equal between these two lenses, but optically, it's not really any better than the Mark I, which is why it's going to get tricky. Now, if you're a new shopper looking for what's the best 24-70 for my money and I don't have one already, well then I think that the Sigma Mark II is the best bang for the buck by far. I wouldn't get the Mark I unless you're going to get a significant reduction in price maybe on the used market, but if you're buying new, you would buy the Mark II, obviously. It's the same image quality as the Mark I, but with a much better autofocus motor and a lot more bells and whistles. Now, if you already own the Mark I, it's a lot harder of a recommendation because, again, optically, they're identical pretty much. So you'd have to either really need a declickable aperture ring, or you're somebody who says, look, I actually am running into focus issues. That linear autofocus motor is going to make a huge difference for me. Then maybe you can see the $1,200 value there and maybe get some money back on selling your Mark I. And if this was the only Sigma lens that existed, I would be saying a conclusion like, wow, Sigma brought a lens to the market that does like 95% of what the G Master can do at half the price. This is extraordinary, get that. It's just a little bit hard to be that excited when the Mark I exists that is optically pretty much the same as the Mark II. So I guess for a new buyer of a 24-70, there's definitely some excitement to be had with this lens, but for somebody that already owns either the Mark I Sigma or maybe the G Master, it's not as exciting, but still a great lens. All right, I'm done.